Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. What the Truth Can Destroy. Episode 153.
And from across 100 planes the fragments of Iomedae pull back from the hearts they guard, the temples they warm, the dangers they watch, the places they look for opportunity and risk and suffering and possibility. Not all of them. There are some places where they would be missed too badly, or their absence noticed and too much read into them. But for the most part, they pull back like a receding tide and stream for heaven, whose greatest defenders pause in their activities, make their excuses, kiss their loved ones goodbye, and go to guard the perimeter of the divine domain of Iomedae, Golarian's youngest goddess, the goddess of defeating evil. It would be very, very close to impossible to destroy a god in all their power, in their own domain, but immortals do not take the close to impossible lightly, or if they do, they don't grow very old. Iomedae gathers in almost all of the parts of herself, processes all of the conversations and questions and puzzles and confusions that did not previously merit referral upwards, but which are cheap to reconsider now that she is here, takes in a packet of information purchased from Abadar and another from Midori, and lets the calculations that follow from those ripple out across 1,000 trains of thought, rises for the first time in nearly 100 years to the full height of her knowledge and her power and her capacities, and decides what to do. It does not take her long. For not quite 10 minutes, Proelera is too bright to look at, too hot to touch, and would also incidentally give mortals cancer. Then the light fades abruptly, and the heat more slowly, and splintered into 100,000 fragments. Iomedae, diminished, gets to work. Greater Iomedae, Lintamande. They're a very productive 10 minutes. There are entities that do not oppose Asmodeus, but that would, in fact, oppose him if he were credibly on the brink of taking over the world. Evil gods which like the world some other flavour of evil. Good gods who would be making worse trades, operating farther from their own areas of strength, if they acted to directly oppose Asmodeus. Mortals have an instinct for this even when no gods guide them, and you see it at the scale of countries. In a place like Avistan, they will set aside their other enmities in the face of a greater threat, compromise on things they hate to compromise on, mobilize resources they'd preferred to have in reserve. And so it is the case that a drastic strengthening of the position of Asmodeus and of Cheliax does not mean that Cheliax conquers all of Golarion, and does not mean that hell conquers all, nor even does it mean that Iomedae despairs of this universe and joins that fragment of Nethys trying to destroy it. It means that, as a worst-case scenario against which Iomedae can compare her better options, that she can call a convocation of the gods to re-counterbalance against Asmodeus, to check him at their own expense. It means that Sarenrae, whose power goes farthest extended to mortals busy in the assistance of one another, donates power to soldiers instead. There'd be fewer miracles and more funerals. More orphans would starve on the streets. More sick people would die in pain and alone. But the legions of good could swell to meet evil's new power. It means that Erastil, who operates these days almost entirely by rote, to save his power for his works, answering instinctively the prayers of farmers with blighted crops, agrees to instead allow Chelish ones to starve, agree to allow their prayers to go unanswered so their grain cannot feed Chelish armies. Humans care about many, many things, and good in its many forms answers nearly all of them, but it could trade that away, at need. Iomedae, herself, would be trading away much more of that already, for the sake of defeating evil, even at the unfavourable ratios that the other good gods could get. But she is not all of human values, and is in fact a segment of them which intends to render itself unnecessary. And then there are agreements that could be made with non-good powers that aren't Asmodeus, to do less to combat Abaddon, in exchange for payments from its powers which could be put to war with hell, to win Pharasma's cooperation with yet another asymmetric concession, like malediction was an asymmetric concession. She hates that plan. She'll do it anyway, obviously, unless she has a better plan. So the question, what beats that? And its accompanying question, what the fuck, Caden Kalian? When that's still not obvious from more data points, she does the expensive thing, to answer it. She severs a sizable chunk of herself and sends it to speak to him. To return only two answers. Should she oppose Caden Kalian? And should she oppose Project Lawful? On the assumption that Caden's explanation for not just telling her what's going on has to do with other irrevocable commitments he's made, or else with a very narrow path Nethys is attempting to navigate, or else with the desire to avoid, her wrath for his betrayal, and any part of her that reports to the rest of her won't see from him anything that'd distinguish those, and the credibility of lesser commitments among them has apparently broken down. So, just enough of her to answer that question, even if he's acting against her and trying to deceive that fragment, with no capacity to return anything more than the answer, enormously costly, to lose that much of herself for the duration of the current emergency, but not as costly as either a wrong war against Kalian or a right war erroneously refrained from.
Caden Kalian will tell that fragment of her the entire truth, this time. All of it that he knows. He can do that, if the information won't reach the rest of her, if Yomede's strategic decisions implied by that truth can be made under conditions of that information, having been provided by Kalian, conditional on that information not working against his own interests.
And though Iomade won't know it for a time, Milani is also called forth by Caden Kalian to speak to that fragment of Iomade, to add what credibility Milani possesses herself, and to apologise not for having made any wrong decisions, but for what the right decision had to be. Apologies between gods are often like that, especially between good and other good.
It returns the answer that she'd considered likeliest. This method of negotiation was successful. These recommendations are confident. It is not in our interests to attempt to destroy Kalian at this time. It is in our interests to attempt to destroy Project Lawful. She cannot directly take aim at the interdiction zone in Ostenso, not to communicate with its inhabitants, not to draw resources off their project, not to force their hand sooner. She'll try to convince Atolmans that this is a stupid policy likelier to wreck the world than save it, of course, but she considers that unlikely to work. It's a very restrictive constraint. She can prepare the forces of good better for the coming confrontation. She can watch the interdiction zone and pass along any secrets it produces more useful than they're doing something highly specific with prestidigitation, but she cannot reach Keltham or any of his other actor slaves, and she cannot take aim even at Cheliax as a whole without legibly exhibiting that the decision is in. Her interests absent any considerations of its effects on the interdiction zone, and that, she intends no specific ones. It's a very strong constraint, but it means she's racing through a much smaller search space, exhausting it quickly, seeing right away everything that is worth trying. 3 different demon lords consider themselves to be in control of the world wound on the demon side, each of them controlling different aspects of influence from it, and considering theirs the true and meaningful kind. Iomede is strongly averse to negotiating with demon lords, mostly on the very straightforward grounds that they'll inevitably betray you at the first opportunity, and secondly on the more complicated grounds that they aren't gods, and everything would be worse if they were gods, and negotiations as equals with gods are the sort of things that a clever demon lord can leverage into an ascension. In acting too aggressively against an enemy, you inevitably create your next enemy and cause immense mortal suffering into the bargain. And yet, at this moment, Iomede's forces are largely deployed at the World Wound. That has to change, to counter Cheliax in war. And the fact that demon lords are not constrained by a Tolman's interdiction regarding the intervention of gods is not something she can intend but wouldn't inconvenience her if anything came of it. There are other demon lords also worth reaching out to. What price would Abraxas, demon lord of forbidden law, demand for teaching Lastval the spell silver refining techniques of ancient Aslant? It'll be terrible, of course, but at this scale she can measure precisely how terrible, and contemplate what the forbidden knowledge of ancient Aslant would have to be to make it worth it, and then derive what the forbidden knowledge of ancient Aslant must in fact have been, and then authorize it? Why do demon lords always want things like one of your unwilling paladins to be slowly consumed alive by locusts? Even if Iomedae was chaotic evil, she'd be more ambitious than that. Next up, talking to Zon Kuthon.
Zon Kuthon can no longer think more than fragmentary thoughts, even gathered into one place like this. 4 pessimally chosen network nodes within him are destroyed by treachery. Internal energy messages, sent out by continuing reflex, fail to be caught at their destinations, and every time it happens, one more tiny bit of him is gone. Zon Kuthon is dying, slowly, on an exponential decay. That decay has a bound. A little after he is too weak for his fragments to reflexively grant even first circle spells and orisons, they will disperse. Zon Kuthon is not turning back into Daubral. His assassin tried her best, but he's not. That happy ending was rather less probable than not from the beginning, even if worth trying for.
That was not expected. Strongly unexpected, even. 1,000 implications stream away from it in all directions. One could almost see the whole truth just from that, if one were big enough and thought fast enough. But the most urgent implication is this. He should not die alone. His sister will want to be with him, and then she'll owe Iomedae a very large favour, which she intends to cash in immediately.
Shellin, to love another person, Lintamandi. I don't suppose it can wait 10 minutes.
Not really. I do wish it had gone otherwise, and I'm sorry.
You wish it had gone otherwise because then we'd have a chaotic good god in our back pocket.
Yes. I didn't love him, and will not grieve him. Anyway, the favour I need is for most of Cheliax's units at the World Wound post nearest Nerosian to be amenable to defection when we show up to offer it.
You can't force redemption on people. All you can ever do is offer it.
It looks from here like you can offer it in a particularly compelling manner, with very high acceptance rates at a much higher cost. I anticipate the objection that it's more intrinsic to your nature, less costly for you, and more consistent with your values to not craft irresistible redemptions. But you owe me a favour. I need that fort, and Cheliax needs to believe I have a project-derived superweapon for turning Chelish people good.
I understand.
Next up, she's going to tell Nidal that Zon Kuthon is dying and they'd better launch an offensive against Cheliax before their strength further diminishes.
Snack Service said Nidal recently noticed they lost 8th circle spells and that they were going to launch an offensive soon. Snack Service didn't say the two facts were connected. Snack Service would never lie to the Asmodeans, but still, Asmodeans, they're into that sort of fun, right?
By the time Peranza reaches Hell, the fragments of Iomedae's attention have struck out to work the plans that she formed before diminishing, and answer the questions that remain to her at the height of her focus, and observe the pieces that will either move in her favour or not. It's a heroic effort, but it's one that is expected to produce a world worse than the one Keltham landed on. If it were otherwise, she'd have done all these things long ago, in a gentler world, where there was less of a premium on her resources. Iomedae would look in on the girl who cried out to her, whose body is now a statue and whose soul is now in hell, and maybe try to let her know, while she still remembers her name, that it mattered. But Iomedae has never lived in a gentler world and does not look or offer a bid for the information, or devote more than a flicker of computation to grief.
Once Peranza is in the gardens of Eracura, Caden Kalean will gift Iomedae a fragment of observation, passed on from the luckier fragment of Nethys who watches over that place, showing Peranza robed now in white, her feet in an endlessly flowing stream, speaking of lesser mysteries with other souls in the garden, bright and happy and shining lawful good. This information must not be used in a way which disadvantages Asmodeus, such as to suggest to any of his other victims that a similar safety might be on offer to them if they defected.
And that, combined with the rest, would have been enough to see the whole thing. But it is not safe for Iomedae to focus herself so intently again. Decades were lost on work of great importance to her in even the short time she did it. She nods, and passes upwards a flicker of confusion about why intervene here, and not in the hundreds of other similar people this happens to every day, and the flicker of confusion goes unresolved for long enough.
Pilar hears later that long night that Peranza suffered some kind of major mental break, details locked behind the infohazard containment conditions for that section of the project, and is now a statue pending there being actual Celish Yelani to talk with her. She knows immediately that her earlier adventure must have been to talk a Barco. He's the one who took her cookie, looking not particularly happy about it, out of doing something severe to Peranza in the hopes of gathering more information from her, which, yes, Keltham would not have been happy about, even if turned to evil, obviously. Pilar is not quite able to stop herself from thinking that this is the result of her first, brief attempt to be spiteful.
Pilar! It's okay. What happened to Peranza would have happened to her eventually, even if Pilar hadn't made the suggestion she did. It would have happened to Peranza even if snack service had never come to Pilar. It wouldn't benefit Asmodeus for other people on the project to hear this part. It'd move them from a state of mind more useful to him to a less useful state of mind. But Peranza will be all right.
Pilar doesn't care about that. Pilar shouldn't care about that.
Only Pilar can be the judge of that. Snack service was telling her so that the matter didn't actually come between Pilar and Asmodeus. Snack service has been thoroughly instructed by Pilar not to care about Pilar after all.
Why is my life like this?
Your life, that's obvious. The real question is, why is my life like this?
PL timestamp day 63.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I could try, I guess, to stay on the project, but I don't think I'd be much good to anyone like this. Not worth anyone's investment.
Ignacy of House Manric, 8th Circle Wizard of Cheliax, borrowed from the Nadal front lines to detect Keltham's thoughts, is going to leave the fortress considerably more impressed with the chosen of Asmodeus than was Manohar. Keltham's thoughts show not even a flicker of suspicion of Peranza. It doesn't even occur to Keltham to think about Glimpse of Beyond and how he doesn't have it prepared today. The chosen's lie seems to have been perfectly fitted to this otherworlder. From Keltham's thoughts, it seems that this is something that happens often in Dathilan, even in the matter specifically of greater mastery of law being something that sometimes produces a collapse of self-deceptions inside somebody about how much they enjoy being alive and them not being able to live with themselves after that and going into cryosuspension early. Keltham feels bad about not seeing it coming as a possibility, though even if he had, there's not much he could or should have done about it. The only flicker of suspicion, in Keltham, is about how it seems almost like a fear drawn specifically from his own thoughts. He rejects it after a moment's consideration. If the hypothetical conspiracy could read his mind and get that degree of information about Dathilan, why do they need him for anything? And also, there's no clear prior reason whatsoever why the hypothetical conspiracy would need to yank Peranza in particular off the project that Keltham knows about. Base rates, Keltham thinks. This happens often in civilization, and it should happen even more often in Galarian, where people's lives are less happy. It hardly seems like there's anything for Ignacy to do here at all. The Chosen's plan appears to be playing out perfectly. Though, of course, given the catastrophic delicacy and importance of Project Lawful, it's understandable that they did call him in, just in case, for a major event like this one. People in civilization do sometimes take a week or a year to think about it first. Talk with family or friends or sometimes a keeper. I mean that assumes the existence of quiet cities, or just that you have enough savings to take time off like that, and that you've got drugs to try, or cognotherapists to speak to, and you don't owe your own existence in this place to anyone. But I'm just saying, people in civilization would usually do that.
Cheliax Galarian isn't really set up to have an option like that for people. I'm very sure I'm not going to change my mind. But I guess I do have the money to take a week off, somewhere that isn't here, but still where security can see me. I'm so sorry for wasting all the effort you invested in me, for everything, really.
I'm sorry, too. Sometimes it happens that beer people's self-deception that they're happy makes them less sad, enough to continue. They don't dwell on the negative emotions they're not letting themselves see. It's One of the famous examples of arguably info-hazardous information that if you delude yourself into thinking you're very happy and not sad at all, you can still be happier than the sadness you're not letting yourself see. And then when you stop self-deceiving about that, you don't want to keep going. I mean, it's not a fun way to be, and you wouldn't want to have kids if that was the heritage you were giving them. But sometimes people like that, if they're given a chance to continue on, can improve or put themselves together before they realize. I'm sorry.
Don't be. I volunteered. I got paid. I wouldn't actually have wanted my past self to go on like I was, even not knowing. I wasn't actually happy.
Keltham doesn't cry, doesn't even let himself be too overtly sad at her, because that is not polite, and somebody in her situation does not need to be doing emotional labor about his own emotions. Of course, if you're Chelish, you don't need detect thoughts to read him anyways. Goodbye, Peranza. See you in hell, maybe.
Please don't go looking for me there for a while. I'll tell the devils if I get into shape to talk to anyone, but I don't want to be thinking about that, trying for that. I just want to rest for a time first.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to imply anything like that. Goodbye, Peranza. Period.
Goodbye, Keltham. She leaves without another word.
He watches her go, and then gets back to his work. It happens, needing to say goodbye to somebody for a time. Not usually when you're this young, but it happens.
How much do I need to pay to buy my own tiny sword of glibness to keep?
Your soul, says Carissa entirely seriously, and reaches out her hand to take it back.
PL timestamp, day 63, long night.
Carissa has learned lots of Dath-Alani techniques for shaping herself better. She has learned how to notice her mental flinches so she can hammer them out of existence. She has learned how to catch herself having an un-Asmodean impulse and punish it near instantaneously so as to train the habit out of her mind at the very start. She has gotten absolutely nowhere on teaching this to anyone else, but that's all right. You perfect yourself first and then see if anyone else can be salvaged. She sort of wanted to get torturing the security who fucked up the Peranza situation nearly to death over with quickly, but on examination, that was an un-Asmodean impulse, less about her valuable time than about still relating to torture as something distasteful. Reversed stupidity is not intelligence, but sometimes it's healthy to do exactly the opposite of what feels natural, to teach yourself that it still works out fine. So when she needed to go to sleep last night, she did not tell him that it was over, and now she will be resuming. This is a skill, after all, and if she wants to be a power in hell, she needs to be as good at it as she is at spellcraft, and if people insist on volunteering to help teach her, well, she'll use their sacrifice to learn. Snack service hasn't objected to this for some reason. Uncharitably, Carissa figures that Caden Kylian only cares about pretty girls who cry out to Iomadae and not about prematurely balding men who cry out to nothing in particular.
Subirax is very, very relieved about the report she'll be able to pass on to the Most High about this. It places Subirax's own eternal fate, to say nothing of her status in Cheliax, in less worrying doubt. It would be better if the Chosen were enjoying this more. But even if she's not, so long as the Chosen is not feeling much active distaste, not feeling like she's forcing herself to do this, if she's just getting used to it, that's also progress. Sevar can maybe try again later to find her own particular enjoyments in this activity, if any, once she's over the general shock.
She wants to be like Abigail, wants to understand people well enough that when she takes them apart, she can put them together stronger. But you can't let the gulf between where you're at and where you want to be get in the way of getting better from your current starting point. Sure, look for clever shortcuts, but if there aren't any, then get started on the work. She's not feeling miserable. She's actually doing a lot less feeling things lately, which has worked out great. And she must master this, and will master it, and will enjoy it once she's good at it. She doesn't kill him. There aren't that many security-cleared wizards, and she just put all that effort into training him. And besides, it makes the whole thing better, the look on someone's face when they learn that they're not, in fact, going to die. Yet. She leaves the torture chambers in time to get some spellcraft practice in unless Subirax wants her, which she reluctantly trots off to find out.
Sevar should exhibit her work to the rest of the project at some point. That's a lot of the point here. Torturing him in a way that makes him better is hard when the punishment has to be this severe. It's a lot easier to make other security better with it, and the other project personnel. That's the greater part of the reward of this activity, which Sevar shouldn't neglect to collect for herself.
She sort of assumed word would just get around, since there's been security stationed. Is she supposed to do a guided tour? At the World Wound, you could hear the screaming, and that was pretty much all the information you needed.
Word has also gotten around the project that Carissa Sevar is secretly the daughter of Infrexis. Sevar has made a point of being merciful under carefully defined conditions of mercy, broader than usual. It needs to be known, not just rumored, that Sevar personally tortured this fool, that the Chosen's patience is in fact limited. It needs to be explicit under what conditions her tolerance was exhausted, and that it didn't consist of this man, say, spurning her sexual advances. Subirax doesn't need to have heard that rumor to know it exists, spontaneously materialized into Golarion by whatever ethereal entities produce them from nothingness.
It is really no wonder that Asmodeus hates humans so much. Fine. Everyone can gather around then, and she'll explain. This is a hard job. It is a dangerous job. Expectations are high. Carissa expects high performance, and she has tried very hard to ensure that it's rewarded and ensure that mistakes, which look like mistakes on the way to high performance, are not punished. However, if you are responsible for monitoring a girl in the middle of a mental breakdown, and you don't think of telling any of your superiors that she's in the middle of a mental breakdown because they're intimidating, and then she starts trying to do something incomprehensible and dangerous with her mind, and you take fully 2 rounds to figure out what to do about that, and then Gorthoklek needs to be called in, then she'll in fact be irritated enough to practice torturing people on you for a couple consecutive nights. Is that confusing? You will not be tortured for asking questions. Asking questions is not very similar to failing at monitoring a girl having a mental breakdown for a very long time in a fashion that requires emergency intervention from a Gorian.
First mind reading results. They're very confused about what could go sufficiently wrong with a second circle teenager that a pit fiend gets called in to handle it. Nobody, in fact, has any questions that they're refusing to ask for reasons that strike the security as Sevar disapproved. Many people are thinking what the fuck actually happened, but correctly inferring that this is probably dangerous information, and if they were meant to know it, they'd have already been told. A lot of the people in this room, especially the men, are experiencing significantly greater respect for Sevar and the project's stated priorities, now that they know the price of exhausting her patience and that she's not simply weak.
Good. That's good. She should really have been paying attention to what they thought of her already. That's an important variable. Another way this incident was her fault.
Ione Sala looks at the broken wreck of a security and keeps her expression neutral. She's not sure how she ought to be feeling. Her model of herself doesn't say. She hates security, right? And she ought to feel reassured about Peranza by this. Even if nothing is being said about what happened to Peranza, and even if Gorthoklek got called in for some reason, Sevar personally wrecking the security who failed does not particularly seem like the act of somebody who didn't really care about Peranza. Nor is Sevar the type to torture an innocent security in order to fool people about whether she cared about Peranza. That's just silly. Ione doesn't know how she feels, but she sure isn't asking any questions. She hopes Peranza will be okay, eventually. Maybe she'll ask Sevar afterwards if the special girls are cleared to know what really happened to Peranza. But she definitely isn't interrupting now.
Carissa would like this project at this time to be very focused on getting spell silver cheap enough to be a substantial competitive advantage for Cheliax, ideally without the help of anyone, second, ideally without the help of anyone but Avaricia. If that happens, she may seriously recommend to Igorian that they all join Peranza in being petrified for a whole year, so the project cannot fall apart before Cheliax is in possession of a decisive military advantage. That is, at this point, the only way they could even possibly lose, so better to cut it off at the pass. She'd like security to be monitoring for thoughts about whether anyone isn't sure they want to win.
Fiona Sala definitely doesn't want Cheliax to win, and is placing her faith in Nethys to stop that, but with tinges of visible effort. Likewise, in her efforts to convince herself that she would never betray Lord Nethys over that, who has charge of her soul and could shatter her with a touch. Alexandre Esquerra would be terrifically disappointed if Cheliax won while he was statued and before he could build armors to slay Cheliax's enemies himself, but this is not, in Security's judgment, a significant loyalty issue. Several project personnel are confused about what Sivar's plan even means, like they just straight up failed to understand what the plan was about or why they'd be turned into statues or how that gives Cheliax a military advantage. They are afraid to ask.
Sure, okay, she'll talk slower. Several people are confused but didn't ask questions. It would have been appreciated if you asked questions. We are close to having a process for making spell silver very cheaply. This is a decisive military advantage. If Cheliax has that, and no one else does, then eventually we will conquer them. 1,000 very well-equipped high-level magic users with arbitrary resources to throw at the problem can topple any government in the world. Once that happens, the only way Cheliax loses is if someone who knows the secret defects, or if Keltham leaves and goes to Osirion and we can't conquer Osirion fast enough. So once we arrive at that point, the gains to Cheliax from the project proceeding normally are still substantial, but the downside is very high. We have enough of an advantage to win and are only playing to not lose. I don't like playing to not lose. One solution is to petrify Keltham for a year. But the reason we haven't considered that before is that we'll change, from not being around him and he'll be suspicious. So to do that safely, we spend that time in stasis as well. We wake up with Cheliax already having the resources to conquer Osirion on an hour's notice, and we proceed from there. It's a gamble telling them this. But Peranza sincerely thought Cheliax was going to lose, and so it seems important to give people a concrete, testable description of how they'll know Cheliax is on track to win.
Ione tries, and fails, to prevent herself from thinking where security can hear it. That if tropes govern all of this, or Nethys has a plan, that predicts Keltham leaves before the project can get spell silver manufactured to that level. No, that's silly. Right, the Dath Ilani romance novel would probably let Cheliax get that far in order to raise plot tension.
This thought is duly reported to the Chosen.
Carissa thinks that, actually, she's not a character in a story, and whether Keltham leaves depends on her competence, not the next plot beat. But noted.
Asmodia has not been consulted about this plan. Apparently, Sivar came up with it just while talking to Mayayol and Subirax and Abarco or whoever. Asmodia feels a bit insulted about that, in fact. Isn't she practically Sivar's second-in-command? Isn't it her job to check over clever ideas like these for consistency? Have any of those apparently more important than her people been checking over every scrap of information that Keltham interacts with? Mayayol, the actual second, would recognize this feeling immediately. It's the feeling of not being far enough into the inner ring. Asmodia will decide when and whether to later bring up the issue that apparently none of those other important people saw, when they were making this plan without consulting her. She can always claim to have thought of it later.
PL timestamp day 64. PL timestamp day 65. PL timestamp day 66, 70.
After a lecture or two on the ways of creativity inside a box, the easiest and most straightforward sort of creativity that there is, which is at least worth trying in a lot of cases, the project, not Keltham, the project, invents the bimetallic thermometer. By methodology of getting together a dozen kinds of substance that change in various ways with respect to a temperature over the requisite range, and trying to combine every way they can change relative to each other to form any kind of indicator that can be read. Sibila, Tier 2, is the one who simply welds a few thin strips of different metals together, applies heat, and watches them bend slightly as the outer metal expands more than the inner metal. Within an hour, they've got a wound-up spiral coil of platinum gold silver. You can apply heat in the range of most chemical reaction steps, and watch that spiral wind or unwind a little bit per turn through many turns to rotate and move a dial on a temperature setting they're going to calibrate. The alchemist's vampire bat familiar is no longer a bottleneck on several key processes. This takes the project significantly closer, not just to perfecting, but to scaling its cheaper spell silver manufacture methods. And beyond spell silver refining, a whole new world of precise temperature-dependent chemical processes has opened before them, not just for the project, but for every alchemist who doesn't have a vampire bat familiar. It doesn't promote Sibylla to Tier 1 immediately, but it puts her on Keltham's unspoken watch list for it. And if Sibylla doesn't get that promotion outright, she'll sure get a heck of a bonus. And not just that, bimetal thermometers are one more thing the project can sell. For revenue, besides sulfuric acid. And they should maybe properly look into metal refining too, now that they have a way to measure forge temperatures. Yes, Keltham realizes that spell silver is more profitable and the critical step on scaling intelligence headbands, and they should master that part first.
Party time?
Sure.
Cake for everyone!
PL timestamp, day 71, 77.
Down to 3/4 the cost of traditional spell silver production, if any two of Keltham, Avaricia, Carissa, and Shalira are overseeing the entire process. You also need either an alchemist or Avaricia, but it doesn't have to be an alchemist with a temperature-reading vampire bat familiar. Total project, spell silver production at 1.7 pounds. Avaricia and Asmodia have started to train a crew of older Third Circle wizards from Cheliax, now that it's clearer exactly what kind of prestidigitation needs to be done, and how much math it helps to know. And they've got spectroscopes and illusionary optical microscopes and a standard incremental series of chemical reaction pathways to practice on. They're clearly going to be able to do the thing. The only reason it's not time to massively scale yet is that the process is literally improving by the day.
It's the best news in all of human history. Carissa is not in denial about having squishy slime bits that are sad rather than happy. If you're in denial about your squishy slime bits, then you can't hammer them out of existence. She focuses on her headband assembly line. This isn't going to be something that couldn't have been done centuries ago. It's just going to be something that wasn't worth doing centuries ago. No society before Asmodean Cheliax has had large numbers of decently trained Third Circle wizards whose time is not actually intensely competed for, and very few people with abundant spell silver riches would bother spending it on hyper-specific, expensive magic items that can only be used for mass production of a single item because they wouldn't have had a buyer. But with spell silver cheap, it works. She has it down for +2 headbands and should be able to figure out +4 headbands very soon.
She's been having a lot of mixed feelings about things, but even if this puts Cheliax on greater alert against Keltham escaping, Asmodia doesn't think she can delay reporting any longer and still look remotely competent. Asmodia has been thinking about how to package up the project for stasis, since they're getting closer to the spell silver production target. Asmodia admits fault for not thinking of this earlier, especially since it's her responsibility to think of this sort of thing, as the consistency checker who actually reads everything Keltham sees, all of the documents he's exposed to, like Cheliax's contract with the project. Keltham wrote in some pretty tight provisions about all of Cheliax's project knowledge-derived industry having gratuities payable to the project. If the project shuts down for a year while Cheliax produces a massive amount of spell silver, even for its own internal use rather than being resold, the contract says an internal price with the project needs to be negotiated, and the resulting revenue has to accrue to the project, and revenue has to be reported to Keltham. He clearly did think about the possibility that Cheliax would do a bunch of stuff and theoretically transfer money to the project, but then not tell him about it. And Keltham has the right to examine related accounting and production books. If they run the stasis plan, that's basically planning for the conspiracy to blow up when the next revenue report is due. Maybe that's deemed worth it for the 1-year head start on Cheliax's enemies, but
doing the stasis plan is going to be an enormous logistical headache along every possible dimension, but I think that one might be manageable. Lurilatha wrote the contract, and we had in mind that Keltham might get stasised for extended periods. I think they have some workarounds in mind. You should talk to Mayol about it.
She'll do that then.
Yeah, Mayol was wondering when or if Asmodia would point that out. She's been a favorite of his, but he was starting to doubt her competence there. If it gets to that point, Cheliax is going to present a putative plan where Cheliax withdraws wizards and resources from a lot of other things like school academies and makes a truly massive push to scale up Spellsilver production and do a lot of mining and catch up on part of the demand backlog, and maybe not die during the war with Nadal. It will be clearly said to Keltham that this is not sustainable. The books can't be false, but the Queen can pass an act legally creating a separate calendar for project-related companies, which runs 13 times slower for the duration of that year, making all the dates showing massive production over the next month be legally correct. Asmodia needs to keep in mind that her superiors are not, in fact, complete incompetence. Lurilatha and Abrogale Thrune put some cleverness into this.
Acknowledged. Sir, I'd be lying if I claimed to be confident that Keltham is going to buy this. This did not happen in Alter Cheliax at all, sir.
Kid, that is sometimes worth doing occasionally. Like when it buys a massive nation-scale military and political advantage and makes it less threatening for us to fail for the entire rest of the project. You're offended that you weren't consulted about this. It's not a question.
I admit fault.
Don't. I wasn't trying to correct that impulse. You see, there's an inner ring. You see, you're not part of it. You want in. That's good, Asmodia. You can get in. It's just going to take you a while longer before you're ready to sit down at the table with myself and Savar and Abrogale Thrune. You can be in the room where it happens. You may be a little older than this when you're seated, but there's a place there for you if you prove yourself worthy. The only reason I'd be concerned is if, say, you noticed this problem earlier and kept it to yourself because you had dreams of thinking up a solution and presenting it to your less competent superiors on a platinum platter, so that we'd know to consult you next time. That would be a problem, Asmodia.
Sir, I obviously tried to think of a solution myself before I came complaining here, but that was today.
Asmodia, don't lie to me. I was going to threaten you and let it pass. Turn yourself in for 20 lashes at the temple and be very glad that you are on Sevar's light punishment plan. This is why you don't have a seat at the table. You're simply too inexperienced. Let's be very clear on this. You are not being corrected for your ambitions. Your ambitions are good. The way in which you express them is bad. 20 lashes. Don't do this again.
Acknowledged.
Dismissed.
When it's over, Pilar offers her a cookie. It's a cookie with sugar chips inside, which, in the mental scheme and code Asmodia devised to ask this secret question, means that snack service isn't saying that Asmodia's sponsor wants her to try to sabotage the project or warn Keltham. With her shielded thoughts and hell immunity that make her the only person who could maybe plan that and get away with it. Okay.
PL timestamp, day 78.
Mayol sits Asmodia down and gives her the talk. When it's okay to undermine your colleagues. When it's okay to amuse yourself by tormenting your subordinates. The relatively rare circumstances when you should try to kill your superior and take their place, you are a lot more likely to get away with that if your superior wasn't valuable and isn't anyone's pet and was being visibly incompetent, and you are clearly more competent than they are. Be conservative about evaluating that sort of thing. A lot of people get themselves worse than killed by having a self-favoring bias and being shocked that their new superior doesn't agree about them being more competent than their dead ex-boss. The tyranny is not there to be your friend. It's not your superior's friend either, obviously. But all else being equal, the tyranny wants both of you working for it and producing for it. They're going to check whether any apparent incompetence of your superior was actually you sabotaging them, and they were a decent performer before that. Encouraging that sort of gameplay is not in the tyranny's interest. Your fundamental job responsibility that isn't directly to Asmodeus or yourself is about making your boss look good. If you try to kill and replace your boss, it had better make your boss's boss look good. And that's harder to pull off than you might think. Seizing your boss's job without killing them is unreasonably advanced for somebody Asmodea's age. Anybody you've replaced like that is likely to hang around severely resenting you. Your boss's boss knows that. They mostly won't promote you into somebody else's place unless they're ready for them to die, or they have some other position to send them to where the two of you won't get into trouble with each other. Also, Asmodea's boss is, depending on how you look at it, either Magyol or Sevar. The main moral of the talk is that Asmodea should not try to kill her superiors and seize their positions until she is older.
It's kind of embarrassing, but Asmodea knows that she is being shown favor by being told this, and she will respond with the appropriate attitude of somebody who understands that she's being done a favor and that a return will be owed on it.
PL timestamp day 7980.
Can you stop giving Keltham cleric spells as a warning to him that something is wrong?
No, we did try to make the case to her Tolmans, actually, but she quite reasonably rejected it.
It's not an intervention.
These gods do have a reasonably sophisticated conception of the status quo that isn't not taking any actions. And taking non-actions can be an intervention. Otherwise, none of this would work at all.
There's certainly a case to be made that in the ordinary course of events, you would have withdrawn your support from Keltham at this point, in light of how he's helping Cheliax conquer the world, and you condemn wars of conquest. I realize there's the question of how knowingly he can be said to be doing anything he's doing, but...
Tried it. Split off a bunch of threads of attention and fed them different subsets of information we might reasonably have had about the situation if we'd not been paying it close attention. A couple of them decleric him, but most don't. And we don't want to do that anyway, except insofar as he's relying on his spells as an assurance he's on track, that we have a duty not to give him if we can avoid it. He's inventing all the chemical industry needed to make the world stunningly rich. He's doing everything right. He's just doing it in Cheliax.
They're going to come here first.
My money's on Andoran, actually, unless we force their hand. Navies take time to build. Nephreti's an unpredictable variable. And once they have Andoran, they have a much better position from which to hit us. I'm aware that is not very reassuring.
Correct, it isn't. Nephreti, please stop that.
One of the houseplants against the wall turns into Nephreti clepati. Your staff overwaters those plants, did you know?
Are you here to help develop a war plan against Cheliax?
No, actually, I was just here to tell you about the plant thing.
PL timestamp day 81, pre-dawn.
What? Who are you? Where am I? And what's going on?
Cheliax is lying to you about hell, said Thraces. First, just in case that's all she gets to say, and Cheliax does not swoop in to steal him back right that minute, so... Hell is a place of torture. Most people don't become devils. Most people just suffer forever. Even the ones who become devils lose everything about them along the way. There are thousands of times more people there than there are here in Golarion, and most of them long for death every minute of every day. She's got some freaky face paint and scarification on both cheeks and down both arms. Her eyes are scanning the environment like she expects them to explode at any second.
How do you propose I figure out if that's true or false? Who are you? How did I get here?
Ask your god for the spell Vision of Hell, 4th circle. I'm Setara. This is Pyrasis, gesturing at the door. We're trying to end the world. We need your help.
Pyrasis doesn't tell me anything. Neither does Setara, for that matter. That's something I would have thought myself unlikely to go along with. So how are you planning to persuade me? How did I get here?
Grabbed you out of your bedroom. They almost certainly know you're gone. We have non-detection up, but it shouldn't actually stand against Cheliax actually trying, so we're probably going to get caught in the next minute or two. You would understand that the world had to end if you understood what it's actually like. Suffering, 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 from birth to death and long after, inescapable, involuntary. Very few people would choose to be born into this world if they got a choice, or choose to have children. If they got a choice about that, it all has to go.
How do you propose I verify that? How did you know I exist? Who's my god?
Ask living people. Scry dead people. It's not a secret except from you. Any book about hell you read that Cheliax didn't select for you will say it. Any person you ask that Cheliax didn't choose will know it. Presumably, Abadar, have you got a first circle truth spell?
Yes, tell me what symbol that spell would show according to you, and I've noticed you not answering my question about how you even know I exist.
We work in small cells, and this is a suicide mission that plausibly ends with me in hell. I don't know anything like how we got the tip. The symbol is 2 curved lines. Like so, it's some kind of economic theory thing. Abadar's not worth serving, though. He isn't doing anything about all of the suffering in the universe. He fought against Rovagug.
Okay, look. If this is actually real, and you hanging around here is going to get you sent to a place of eternal suffering, then you need to tell me how to get back in touch with you people, and then teleport the fuck away from wherever this is.
She beams fiercely at him. We'll find you when you're out of Cheliax. Step back at least 10 feet.
10 feet are backstepped. If what you say is true, I'm going to have to magically hide when I'm out of Cheliax. How do I get a message to you?
Don't hide from sending, okay? And we'll contact you. Well, they'll contact you. Perissus releases her grip on the magic item clutched in her left hand, and both of them are consumed, instantly smiling, by 5 beads of fireball.
Sir, I regret my failure to retrieve contact information from them.
Wrong priority. You pushed too hard there, at the end. We do not want them figuring out that this mission failed and repeating it, and that is a higher priority than tracking down 1 cell of Rovagug cultists.
44 minutes earlier.
Can Caden Kalian please have authorization for an intervention in the prohibited zone?
What, why, and no?
The why is that Caden Kalian has spotted a band of Rovagug-aligned mortals who are about to target the anomaly-securing, containing, and protecting installation constructed by Asmodeus in order to kidnap the anomaly and try to get him to destroy the universe. This is Caden Kalian being very legible about that. Caden Kalian requests permission to update his oracle's curse with an information packet, after which Caden promises that his oracle will stop the Rovagug-aligned mortals from obtaining the anomaly.
How about if Automen's just squishes the Rovagug-aligned mortals?
Then there will be more Rovagug-aligned mortals later. Caden Kalian's oracle will make the Rovagug cultists believe they succeeded at their mission, which will diminish the incentive for them to try it again. This will go a little better with some subtlety, Otolmens.
Fine, Caden Kalian is authorized to carry out that one intervention once.
Surprise not getting kidnapped by Rovagug cultists in 30 minutes, party!
Blah, what?
Security!
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059